Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Philly Jazz Talks About, and tonight it's WRTI. Welcome to the Philly Jazz Talks. I'm Suzanne Cloud, Project Director of the Philadelphia Jazz Legacy Project. And this evening, we're going to be talking to three people who really know jazz radio up close. Two of them are veterans of WRTI in Philadelphia. And one is a veteran of Boston NPR radio and public radio. So among other things, a thousand things. But before we do that, it's important that you all know that these jazz talks are brought to you by the Philadelphia Jazz Legacy Project. We're an organization whose mission is to establish a permanent jazz archive for Philadelphia area jazz artists and the community at large. We're establishing an archive through recordings, video interviews, manuscripts, material culture like photographs and programs and posters, anything that relates to Philly jazz and its history. And of course, Temple University WRTI certainly is part of Philly jazz history, a huge part. So that's why we're doing this this evening. I'd also like to thank the Philadelphia Cultural Fund for partially sponsoring these talks. Without their help, these programs would not be possible. I also want to thank the people who support us with their donations and to the attendees tonight who donated to hear us discuss this topic that is very near and very dear to most jazz musicians in town. We appreciate all of your gifts so much. Just want to remind you to get a reminder of our events and all the work we're doing at the Philadelphia Jazz Legacy Project. You can go to our website, phillyjazzhistory.org, and sign up for our monthly newsletter. You have all kinds of nice, tasty things that are in the newsletter that really, if you have a jazz craving for history, you'll get it fulfilled with our newsletter. So now I want to introduce tonight's guests, and they're all big powerhouses. It's going to be, I can't wait. First on the list is Steve Rowland. He's a producer, director, oral historian, documentarian. He's produced over 50 hours of radio documentary work since 1987. He produced the 11-hour documentary Leonard Bernstein, An American Life. He also created the acclaimed 8-hour Miles Davis radio project hosted by Danny Glover, a 5-hour documentary on John Coltrane called Tell Me How Long Train's Been Gone, and individual 2-hour documentaries on a number of other American icons, including Carlos Santana, Music for Life, Patti LaBelle, Gospel into Soul, Frank Zappa, American composer, and Hip Hop 101, On the Road with the Roots. His work is in the permanent collections of the Library of Congress and the Museum of Television and Radio. Steve has won nearly every award in radio, including 2 Peabodys, a Pew Fellowship in the Arts, an award from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and a National Arts Journalism Award. His work has been funded by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the National Endowment for the Arts, and the National Endowment for the Humanities. So may I say that Steve Rowland is a veteran of WRTI radio, which we'll be hearing about very soon. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Homer Jackson, he's the executive director of the Philadelphia Jazz Project. He's a very talented interdisciplinary artist from Philadelphia whose work has been presented as installation art, performance art, public art, and video and audio presentations. In 1980, Temple University's jazz radio station recruited Jackson to host a weekly radio program and produce a monthly magazine. And Jackson enriched WRTI's programming through artist interviews, record reviews, and profiles on key musicians and musical movements going on. Jackson is a BFA graduate of the Philadelphia College of Art, and he holds an MFA from Temple University's Tyler School of Art. He has performed or exhibited works at the Philadelphia Art Alliance, the Nexus Gallery, the Moore College of Art, the Yellow Springs Institute, the Painted Bride Arts Center, and the Institute of Contemporary Art in Philadelphia. Homer's received special recognition for his work with Youth at Risk for the President's Committee on Arts and Humanities. So welcome, 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 Homer Jackson.
Thank you. Thank you. And actually, Steve Rowland recruited me.
We'll get to that, Homer. Steve Robinson is our third panelist tonight. And he has a very rich history, which if I actually try to go over the whole bio, it would take probably about an hour. So it's going to be condensed. He started his professional career in 1967 at WBUR in Boston while he was still majoring in music at Boston University. At WBUR, he produced 6 two-hour classical music programs per week. And he also created a Saturday morning live call-in program about high fidelity called Shop Talk, which became the model for the very, very popular and successful Car Talk. Later, Steve would hold positions at WGBH, WCRB in Boston, and KPFA at Berkeley. In 1980, he became the first development director for the newly created jazz station WBGO in Newark. At BGO, Steve helped to establish the station as the preeminent jazz radio station in the United States. In 2000, Steve became the general manager of WFMT and the WFMT radio network. Founded in 1951, WFMT is widely considered to be one of the most admired classical music stations in the United States. And under Steve's leadership, many new programs were added, including Introductions, the only radio series produced locally in the US devoted to presenting the most gifted pre-college instrumentalists, chamber ensembles, bands, choruses, and orchestras in the region. Another program, Impromptu, presented live performances by local, national, and international artists on a regular basis during prime time. And he greatly increased ongoing series of live broadcasts from the greater Chicago region and beyond. The WFMT radio network was established in 1975 to produce and syndicate the concerts by the Chicago Symphony. But when Steve took over, it was losing money and clients. Under his leadership, the network has become one of the most important producers and syndicators of classical, jazz, folk, and spoken word programming in the world. Steve has served on numerous boards, including the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra, the Chicago Children's Chorus, Rush Hour Concerts, Merit School of Music, Grand Park Symphony Orchestra, the Pianoforte Foundation and Music in the Loft, and he currently serves on the boards of the Chicago College of Performing Arts at Roosevelt College. Steve left WFMT in October 2016 to form his own company, New Media Productions, and we'll have the URLs for all these terrific guys' websites for you guys to have at the end of the show. So we have quite a panel here tonight, and I expect a lot of questions later on in the questions box. So welcome to all of you. Let's go.
Thank you.
Where's Steve? Oh,
I'm here.
no, the other Steve. There he is.
He's there.
All right. Well, who wants to go over the early history of WRTI? Just why it was even, me and Homer were talking about it earlier about NPR being the creation of, as an answer to the unrest in the cities, 1969. It was created in 1970 by Jay Sebring, right? How do you spell it? Sebring. That's right.
Bill Singer?
Yeah. In 1970. So somebody give me a short profile.
Okay, hold on. First of all, I want to say hello to Russell Westner and Rich Tedesco, who are both WRTI alums, and it's a pleasure to have them in the audience.
Oh, okay.
And so I'll just give you my brief overview. One thing about RTI is that it's like one of those stories, like whoever you ask, they have a different story. So it's just one of those things. It's sort of like folk tales. So yeah, RTI became a jazz station in the late 60s during some of the unrest and some of the protests in North Philadelphia about Temple incurring on the neighborhood. And it became known as the Freedom Sounds. And it was a multicultural staff that was really playing new music at the time, a lot of Alice Coltrane, Joe Henderson, Pharoah Sanders, and it was a beautiful time. Shortly after that, I came back to Philadelphia. I had moved away and then came back and was working at the Foxhole Cafe, presenting new music concerts at West Philly at the in the basement of St. Mary's Church. And the management of RTI had been, it was taken over by a guy named Samir Ali Sadek and Umar A. Abdul Hafiz. And they had a very particular approach to the music, which was something that I wasn't fully on board with, but it was interesting. But it was a very narrow gap of music. It was mainly 50s swing music and bebop, no early jazz and no later jazz. And then I came on in 1979 and shortly thereafter became the music director and tried to revamp and make it a broader spectrum of music that was played. And that's when Homer used to be one of the regular attendees at the Foxhole, including, and also was Richard Nichols, who later became the founder of the Roots. And he's passed away and we miss him dearly. But Homer and Richard were among the two first people that I wanted to get on the staff. And we ended up with quite a remarkable collection of people who were deeply invested in the music. And one of the things that we'll talk about a little later, one of the key things to me always has been for any kind of in-depth music radio, whether it's classical music or jazz or anything, is that each presenter should be deeply invested in the music, have their own perspective, their own concept of how the music works and how it presents, and a depth of history that they can present as they're playing the music. And we had that in that time. It was really quite beautiful.
And there was a lot of students, right? There was a lot of student engagement, correct, at that time?
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that had happened with the previous group that was there, was that they were not students. They were sort of like pretend students. They would like register for a class and then toss the registration. It was, it was a little hanky-panky, but it wasn't whatever. That's what it was. So, but that's why, like, Homer was in the art school. So I was like tracking, and Richard was a student and I was a student. We were all legitimate students. And that was what we were trying to do. And the one thing that I think that was sort of clear to me, and Steve Robinson and I were talking about this before, and I believe that Homer would agree also, is that I felt very strongly that as a radio station owned and operated by a major university in a major city that had a very large population of people of color, and that it was coming from a university, that the presentation of the music should reflect the entire history of the art form and not just a narrow section of it. And that's what we did. And we had all of the 50s music, the straight ahead music that you can still hear on most jazz radio stations, but we also played a lot of early music. Mike Anderson was one of the great DJs who was really, really deeply familiar with early swing, big band music. And then we had a number of people who were very well versed in presenting the music of the people, of the artists who were alive and struggling to make a living at that time. And we felt it was really important to support them.
Do you remember what the listenership was at that time, Steve?
No idea.
Okay. Now you recruited Homer, right?
Yes, I did.
So Homer, tell me about how you started at the station and what you found when you got there. Well, I can't hear you, Homer. There you go.
Steve met me at a Sun Ra concert and asked me what I was planning on doing in the fall. And I said, oh, I'm actually between things. I'm going to be in graduate school in September. And he said, where? And I said, Tyler School of Art, Temple University. He says, he looked surprised. He says, hey, would you like to be on air? And he said, if you know something about Sun Ra, if you love Sun Ra, you know a lot about the music. And then we started talking, and The next thing I know, I had a show Friday nights from midnight to 4 a.m. I called it the Critics' Choice. And I was on the air for 8 years. And what I found was this amazing collective of young people. I think that's one of the most important things to hammer in. And I wrote these notes here. We're these young folks who are in the midst of revitalizing this station in the age of Wynton Marsalis.
Right.
We're basically the same age, a little older maybe, and we're doing the same thing. We're all volunteers. We love this music. In fact, we used to call ourselves librarians and not necessarily hosts, because we felt like we were holding on to this important information. And that's a broad spectrum of people, folks who really knew the Philadelphia jazz scene, who knew all of the clubs and all the musicians personally, were as much a part of this same thing as we were, you know, who were coming from a more avant-garde kind of direction. But it was a really diverse group of people, young people excited about this music, and all volunteers. In addition, there were other students who were the news team. And over the years, some of those young people who were on the news team are people that you see on ABC News today, or at NBC or CBS or elsewhere in the country. They came out of WRTI's radio station's news team. So we weren't a professional station, staffed professionally, but we were deeply engaged and invested in the music, the culture, and the sustaining of this culture.
I'm interested to see, and I'll ask Steve Robinson this, just the way Homer expressed what the whole vibe was, Steve. Isn't that pretty much the vibe that they wanted National Public Radio to be all about, was bringing in new cultural influences, new kinds of people, and paying attention to stuff that commercial radio would never, ever get near?
Well, once upon a time, yes. In fact, the founder of, you mentioned WRTI, you mentioned Bill Simmering.
Yeah.
Well, he wrote the mission statement for National Public, for all things considered. So, you know, it was it's like the Constitution of the Communist Party, you know, you got to love it, but didn't always work out the way people had hoped. And not that there's anything wrong with NPR, it is what it is, but it's fairly mainstream news.
Yeah. So do any of you, I'll throw this out there, but do any of you feel that that WRTI or NPR radio has lost some of its mission, its reason for being?
But before you pursue, I would just want to say, before you go to that question,
Okay.
One really important thing that's part of this WRTI package is that period, say 1965 to 1975, is the emergence and eventual takeover of FM radio.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So we were all basically astronauts creating this universe that became taken over by corporate interests.
That's right.
Basically, album-oriented radio was for these airwaves that nobody really wanted to hear, supposedly. And it was given to us maniacs to pioneer it and make it possible for audiences to be able to engage in this. So it's funny because when I was a junior high school, I visited WRTI and I met Perry Johnson and some of the other DJs who were there, who would go on to be at WDAS FM and so on, and create that album-oriented kind of flow that would become part of the mainstream of FM radio. So it's really important to recognize that we're all astronauts in a way of what we were doing. And then the place became gentrified.
That is a great point. Steve, so did you see some changes at the station while you were there in the 80s? Steve
Me?
Rowland.
Did I
Yeah.
see changes? Well, I instigated the changes. I mean, that was the whole point. The whole point was to change it because it needed change. It needed change desperately. And, following up on what Homer just shared, which is really important about us being pioneers and astronauts, is that we were, and also that we were really young. We were all in our 20s, and we were deeply, we were like, the music was my life. That was like 24/7. That's what I was about. And it was very important to me. And it was also important because it was important as a cultural vehicle. And it was also important as an anti-racism work. It was really important to me that we had a multicultural staff. And it was really important to me that all of us, white and Black, embraced jazz as a Black music form. And in fact, at one point, while I was there, we had a meeting, and Homer and Richard and several others, we made an agreement that one of the things that we would like to adopt was the Art Ensemble of Chicago's moniker, because they would, people would ask them, well, what kind of music do you play? Do you play jazz? And they would say, no, we play great Black music, ancient to the future. And that was one of the best descriptions of what the music was at the time. And I thought it was a great idea for us to say, you're listening to WRTI 90.1 FM, the home of great Black music, ancient to the future. And I thought it was really important for white people to be able to say that, because that's what the music is. So this was it was a interesting time. And one of the things that I think is really important is that during that time, the attendance for shows of modern music and living music went up dramatically.
Yes.
The Painted Bride shows were sold out all the time because the listeners were being educated and were hearing this music and were loving it. So, one of the big problems that I think is that in the mid 1980s, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting they invested a lot of money in audience research. And this was the new thing, was data-driven decision-making.
Yeah.
And that they were going to do everything on data, and everything was about numbers and audience building and creating very streamlined sounds, and also making sure that the music appealed to people who had disposable income, which is another way of saying white people. Right. So it was an interesting problem all over the public radio system in the whole country. And managers, came in and they said, well, we have to revamp these stations and bring them down. They didn't want the kind of breadth and the kind of depth that we were presenting because they felt it was too unmanageable and it was too unpredictable. And they wanted to have something that was basically repetitive, which was not part of our agenda.
So
It also
right now at the second at WBGO. If there's a controversy there. The new general manager, this is not a slight, is a research guy, and he did a lot of research, and he decided that the reason BGO is in trouble is because they're catering too much to what they call conservative jazz lovers, meaning people who like straight ahead jazz. And now he's adding a lot of fusion. So nothing's changed. I mean, what Steve was referencing started in the 80s, and it's the same with the classical stations. They're afraid of their own shadow. They won't do anything controversial. I remember at WBGO one time right after I got there, the Pacifica String Quartet presented a live concert of the complete 5 quartets of Elliott Carter. Now, if you know Elliott Carter's music, it's not, Mozart and Beethoven. It's very challenging. And I broadcast it live, and my boss almost fired me. It was at 8 o'clock at night, which I knew is not a big time for, I wasn't going to damn it. The next day there was a pledge drive. And I said to Dan, my boss, I said, listen, Dan, it's true when it ended, maybe there were 6 listeners, but you listened to the pledge drive because I interviewed all 4 members of the quartet individually, and it was a pledge drive. And they said, there's no station in the universe that would have done this except WFMT. And most people didn't hear the show and that's interesting. I think I'll pledge. So, but they're afraid of their own shadow. They won't move. They won't play anything past Bartok. Even Bartok, in class,
Yeah.
too much for it.
So basically, we see the whole concept of what NPR was supposed to be about, moving in back into where commercial radio is, except for wealthy white folks. Would you kind of say that, or no?
But I mean, if you contrast NPR News with Democracy Now, for example, you're going to see there's a world of difference there. So NPR is more corporate and straight, and they play it safe. And you look at Amy's show; it tells you, it's night and day.
Now, you all brought up something that it goes to my heart, because I was performing in the 80s, and I can't tell you how important having jazz radio, WRTI, broadcasting your music, advertising your shows, like you were saying, Steve. I mean, that was the air that you guys provided the air that we breathed, basically. And once that was gone, the community suffered so incredibly. I don't know if NPR stations take that into consideration, that they're letting down the music community in their own locale who needs that.
Mm.
Is it usually just market share, or is it, they ever say, oh my goodness,
Well, people are they look at market share, and they look at the success of the fundraisers.
Yeah.
So, so I'll give you, and to bring up economics, obviously it's important for stations to be able to support themselves financially. But if you have a station that is owned and operated by a major university that's got, millions and millions of dollars, maybe it isn't so important for the station to quote unquote make money during the fundraisers. I mean, having a financial stable base is great, because you do get some idea of how much people value your service. But there are different ways of looking at it, and straight numbers don't always tell you the whole story. So for instance, you could create, if you want to just say you want to have an expansive view of jazz history, which includes all the periods of jazz, from early ragtime through swing, through pre-bebop to bop to post-bop, to Miles's electric period, to Coltrane, to the art ensemble, and to all of the amazing young people that are playing music now. You can have that spectrum of music, or you can have a narrow spectrum of music. Most jazz stations in the country, including RTI now, and including the jazz station out here in Seattle where I am, and including BGO, they tend to say, look, let's just play, we don't want to play anything avant-garde or anything modern, because that's too harsh for people. And people, they'll run and turn the radio off, which is not true. But it has to be done with expertise. But they say, well, let's just play 50s music. Let's just play early Miles, early Coltrane, no late Coltrane. Let's just play organ trios with Charles Ireland and great singers, and all that music is great, but it's a narrow spectrum. So you can say, well, look, this is going to bring in more white people, more people from the suburbs, more people are going to feel comfortable. People won't feel left out. It won't be a history lesson. It'll just be background music for people to have at work, and then they'll send money. And that's true. All of that is true. But if you have a broad appeal, and you're really doing good educational work, which is really what this is about, in my opinion, then you have more listeners, and then maybe they'll give smaller amounts of money, but I think it can be done in a way that it evens out. So you're just making a choice about who you want to have listening to the station and what impact you want to have on, as an example, what impact should a jazz radio station have on the local jazz economy? How is it getting people out to shows? How is it educating people? How is it inspiring kids to pick up instruments and play music? What kind of community involvement and support does the radio station have? All those things are important, and some of them are more important than getting money from donors, because there are other places to get money.
Well, yeah, there should be grants should be coming from all kinds of, especially for a public radio station. I wanted to ask you, Homer, Because when I was an avid listener of WRTI all through the 80s and the 90s, you got a really good education from some of the shows that were on there. In fact, a lot of the letters, when I wrote a paper, I was telling Homer about this in 1997, about the changeover from 24/7 jazz at WRTI to half classical and half jazz, kind of. And it was funny. I got the public file and I had all the letters from all the people that were so surprised that this had happened, that they had done this overnight. The jazz people were heartbroken, but so many of them told me, told me through their letters to the station, how much they had learned about jazz, and they never would have become jazz fans except from listening to WRTI. Now, did you ever have that experience, Homer, with people?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It was, being on the air was both an opportunity to be a teacher and a student for all of us. And it wasn't unusual. Richard and I and Craig Baylor and Ludwig Van Trick, we used to, talk about our segues and come up with different, concepts to be able to present something. So say, for instance, you play an Art Tatum tune, and after you play Art Tatum, you play a Horace Silver, and then you play a Sir Roland Hanna, and then you play a Don Pullen, and then a Cecil Taylor. And you show this whole history of the piano, and then take it all the way back to the beginning with James P. Johnson or something like that, But the idea of like looking at the big picture of the music and not just that genre, that time period that we're into. Like ultimately, for me, most of us as Americans, we get our connection to the music, whatever music we're into, in those periods in high school. So
Right.
For the rest of our lives, we're living the goddamn prom night over and over and over and over again. So it's not, it's not nuanced with other people's prom nights. And the whole history of that love that we all have for the music, so that we can have an intergenerational conversation about the music. Sort of like when you have the block party or the picnic, where you play the whole family's music and everybody can enjoy themselves and dance and connect with the bigger story of American music. That was something that we thought about doing. I just wanted to mention two other things. One was the music book at WRTI. The music book was the internet before the internet, being able to give everybody access to all of the music. That was an immense project, a lot of work to organize and catalog all of that work, the music every week, and then do it all over again. But it informed the whole community about what was happening. It was a lifeline between the clubs, the musicians, the other venues, and the audience. And the other thing I wanted to mention, and Steve Robinson could probably go into this more, about the notion of like the cookie cutter, eventual cookie cutter, and maybe that's too much of a term, but the idea of things being homogenized. It reminds me also of what also happened with backpack hip hop or underground hip hop. College stations provided that community all across the country. They would break records and everything. That's how the Roots got out there. And the corporate entities basically crushed that. It all disappeared as Eminem and Kanye West became mainstream stars. That whole thing disappeared, and college radio was disconnected from the record industry for that purpose. And again, so it's like it happens everywhere. Ultimately.
That's a great point, Homer. Now, you just mentioned Steve Robinson. Now, Steve, you've developed classical programming formats and jazz. So can you answer Homer about the cookie cutter aspect and how you went about it, or did you just ignore the money men? Or
I never developed any jazz programming at WBGO. That wasn't my I was the development director. I was the first person to raise the funds and write the grants, and I invented their Jazzathon, which was a 24-hour fundraiser at clubs. You know, I have a lot of opinions about it, and that is that they're all, as I already said it, they're boring. I mean, Steve, I think today was telling me about a station where the job of the music director at a jazz station, you know, you go in on Monday and you program the whole week, and the announcers just play with you. It's just, I call it the willy-nilly approach to program. It's a little bit of this, a little bit of that. It's not connected. It's classical and jazz. They play a CD and another CD, and then the announcer comes on and says something. It's deadly, and none of it's connected. It's very rare. None of it's connected. And when you do that, you're begging the audience to use you as background music. You're just saying, you can't possibly concentrate on this because it's too all over the place. So just use it in the background. We won't offend you. There won't be any Elliott Carter. There won't be any, you know, avant-garde jazz. There won't be any late Coltrane, as Steve was saying. Don't worry about it. You're safe here. And every now and then we're going to ask you to give money, so give money. It's deadly. And somebody on the chat, and they're all the music is available everywhere with streaming. You're in the digital age. If you're just going to mimic a stream, who needs you? And they're going to slowly fade. You know, they'll stay around. You know, they'll get support, but it's boring and deadly, and nobody needs them anymore. Particularly kids. I mean, kids don't even listen to the radio anymore. As we know, all the research says it's podcasts and whatever else they listen to, but it isn't the radio. And who can blame them?
So how would you think is there any changes that can be made in whether it's a college station or alternative stations to possibly get back to the root and the mission of what these smaller stations were supposed to be about?
Why just smaller stations? I mean, any station.
Well, any station, yeah. I'm just used to the small.
I call it TIP, thematically integrated programming. All the programming should be I was never, I will admit, I was never able to pull this off at WFMT. I wanted the staff to meet once a month for a half a day, all come into the room brimming with ideas for themes. So if you're the morning guy, you're going to have a theme Monday through Friday from 6 to noon, one theme, and you're responsible for making that theme and learning about it and teaching about it. And then there'd be themes that were vertical, all day theme, all across the theme. Make it thematic. Anybody who's listened to Exploring Music, which is on WRTI, by the way, that's a show I created in 2003. And I said to the host, Bill, just two things. I want one theme for the week, and don't use a script. I don't want any script. Other than that, you're on your own. And that was in 2003. The show's still on the air, and it's thematic. Every week is the theme. He's done 225 themes by now.
Right.
And it's very successful. And that's what the stations need to do. Instead of that, you know, a little bit of this, a little bit of Coltrane, a little bit of I was going to say Parker. Nobody even plays Charlie Parker anymore on the radio. It's so narrow and boring and deadly.
Yeah, but at the same time, Steve, the example, the brilliant example that Homer just gave us about creating a curated stream of like great piano players that culminates in some of the more modern players, then you understand where that piano tradition comes from. So it's not just the thematic thing, it's having hosts who are creative and bright and engaged and really thinking and really trying to make these things work. You know, I mean, there's a lot of different ways. There's a lot of different ways of, somebody just mentioned in the chat, you know, Bird Flight, Phil Schapp's long-running show about Charlie.
Oh yeah.
You know, and that's, you know, that's, to me, I mean, this is probably not, I don't know. I mean, to me, it's not great radio, because it's just like one person all the time, and it doesn't put it into the context. It removes Parker from the context of all the other great saxophone players.
Right.
And, you know, and Charlie Parker is extraordinary. Yeah, and Phil Schapp was an absolutely astonishing human being, and like an incredible mind, an incredible brain. But I'm not sure that is one way of doing radio, and it's one thing that should have been on the air, and it was great that it was accessible. But I think there's a lot of other approaches.
Well, we have, looking at the chat, you know, we're getting up to 20 up. So I wanted to take some of these chat questions. Now, we had a DJ Harrison Ridley Jr. His historical approach to the
positive music.
The positive music, right.
Yeah.
And he educated so many people.
He
And
was awesome. Amazing person, amazing human being.
Yep.
It was to love meeting Harrison downtown or meet him on the L out in West Philly. He'd be having his 2 shopping bags filled with LPs with his vinyl. And he was, and he was just a fountain of information.
oh
And
my God, yes.
Particularly brilliant about Duke Ellington, but lots of other things too.
Yeah, his smile would light up the room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, incredible enthusiasm. Oh, one thing I wanted to mention is that when we were there, everybody was a volunteer. There was nobody that was paid, including myself as the music director. It was all total volunteer work, and that changed. And I always had a question when Suzanne and you were talking about that overnight transition to classical music. The station, the university said they had no money, and then all of a sudden they bring in an entire staff of classical people who are making $100,000 a year each.
Yeah.
Like, well, wait, where did that money come from? I don't know. I have no idea.
Money. Universities are loaded at all times. Someone just posted Russell Wessner in the chat. You should read that.
All right. Well, okay. Well, I'm working my way down. Somebody just asked, remembering Edgar Brown, the Hawk?
The Hawk was he was amazing. He was amazing. The whole FM vibe. He's like what FM radio becomes. That like dude that back in the 50s would be sitting in the corner in the back in the dark at a Miles concert, But he brought that to the radio. This deep voice, this just the whole hipness of what that culture represented, what Black culture represented in that period coming out of the jazz community. He represented that, and he knew the music so well.
Yeah, he was great. All right. Now here, Richard Eland, one of our attendees here, says the new manager of WBGO has done research which indicates to him that it's important to play fusion in order to grow the audience. So it's part of the mix now. Does any of you agree with that?
Actually, I wrote that.
Oh, you wrote that.
Yeah. No, it was in response to somebody else on the chat. It's not you don't have to agree or disagree. I'm not being critical. It's just a fact. The new manager comes out of research. He ran a smooth jazz station, I guess, in Washington State somewhere. He was hired a general manager. He did research. He commissioned the research, and it said that the reason the station lost half its listenership in the last 2 years, it's in the pits in terms of ratings, was because there was too much catering to the so-called conservative listeners, meaning listeners who like straight ahead jazz. So, okay, well, we need to grow the audience, so we'll play more, fusion, or for lack of a better word. And that's what they're doing. Now, there's still a lot of good music on BGO, but that's what he's doing. And just a fact. I mean, you can agree or disagree, but you can't disagree with what he's doing. That's what he's doing.
Well, I'll tell you something else. There is another way to look at this. One of the things about the United States and about American music history is that it's really deep and rich, and that the musicians listen to everything. And Black music is the predominant music form of the United States, and it has a lot of different arms and branches to it. And you could say that in order to make jazz palatable and sellable to a wider public, that you need to bring in smooth jazz.
Oh, I remember that. Oh,
I would say that's not a really clear-headed thinking about what could be done. If you want to expand away from a straight ahead jazz format, why not include more music like Gil Scott-Heron and Bob Marley and
Grover Washington Jr.
Well, yeah, Grover, there's so much depth in Black music, and if you present jazz as part of that stream, then you have it's a dangerous thing. It could be a problem to do it. You would need a really strong staff to pull that off. But I remember having a meeting years and years ago at WDAS in Philadelphia, because I was asking them, like, how come you guys don't ever play Bob Marley? Like, how could you have a soul music station and not play Bob Marley? It didn't make any sense to me. And it was like, if you had a kind of an integration of jazz and world music and soul music, you would have a very popular format that would have a lot of people listening to it. And it would be better than a smooth jazz format. I can guarantee you that.
Well, one of the basic problems with all classical and jazz radio is that, and I used to tell this to my announcers at WFMT, I said, when you go in the studio, you close the door and you might as well be in a dungeon. You're actually cut off from the world. You can listen to most stations. I don't care which station it is. You won't even know what city it's in, except for the underwriting.
Right.
There's no, listen to WQXR, the classical station in New York. You might as well be in Kalamazoo, nothing against Kalamazoo. You don't know that you're in the most vibrant capital of the world. And it's through a BGO too, frankly. I mean, if you listen day in and day out, it's just CD after CD after CD. And it's, hello. And I know the pandemic put a lot of crimp in things, but that's, it's just deadly. And you're in a dungeon, they're cut off. There's no listener. I call it the overlay of social media onto the radio. There ought to be a way to interact with the listeners in just phone calls and tweets and, make it vibrant, every day should be a festival.
Now I wanted to read what Russell had here. Russell Westner. He said, I
want to welcome somebody. Somebody just joined the call who's a legend of Philadelphia culture and Philadelphia radio, Karen Warrington. It's very nice to see her name here.
Wonderful. Well, welcome, Karen. And Russell writes, I had a great time when I was at RTI from 1973 to 1975 with Edgar Brown, Bob Harris, Greg Ross, Russ Musto, and many others. Nobody ever told us what to play. I remember doing live interviews with Richard Davis when he was at the Foxhole, and he recorded an interview with Gato Barbieri, and thank goodness for the internet and stations like WKCR, which is playing 72 hours of Mingus beginning at midnight tonight.
Well, that's a theme. Now that's the.
Well, I'll be listening. Wow.
I'll never forget the time that KCR did, I think, a 5-day festival of Teddy Wilson, just Teddy Wilson, because he made so many recordings. So you could hear the evolution of this. And if you listen, you don't have to listen to the whole thing, but you would tune in, and that's real radio to me.
And I think, when I taught jazz history at Penn, you have to hook the music to the culture and the life. And if you teach it integrated with that, then they understand what Mingus was why he was writing these songs at the time he was writing them, and why Louis Armstrong was such a hit. And I think that's the only way to really draw people in. And if you don't have DJs anymore that know how to do that, that don't put the context surrounding the music, it's hard for people to, well, what's going on? I don't know. They're not playing the melody that I know, so, I mean, hold on.
Did we mention that it's Mingus's 100th birthday this week?
Oh,
Yeah, I read that. No, we did not. So why don't you mention it?
Let's mention it. Yeah, it's Charles Mingus' 100th birthday. We should all be listening to like 24/7 Charles Mingus for a couple of days.
Yeah.
Tune into KCR. Apparently they're doing it.
Yeah, I'm sure they are.
Starting tonight at midnight. That's what it says on the stream.
Now, Steve, somebody asked about this particular woman, Dorthan.
Yeah, Dorthan Kirk. Somebody asked whatever happened to Dorthan. Well, Dorthan joined WBGO in 1979. She was the second employee, and she left a couple of years ago. She did in charge of all of the music development and all the booking of all the jazz artists for 40 years. And she retired 2 years ago, but is still very involved in the jazz community. She's the widow of Russ' son, Roland Kirk. That's where I met her in 1971. And she's still very much around. She became an NEA jazz master 2 years ago. And I got her the job actually at BGO. And she never lets me forget it. I mean, in the best sense of that. No, we'll be walking down the street and she'll stop, somebody will stop her. And she'll introduce me. Oh, this is Steve. He got me my job. I mean, 40 years later, some people remember things, and she's one of them. Great lady.
She's awesome.
All right,
Yeah.
well,
And, you know, Sue, you mentioned something about the, you know, programming. It's interesting for me because as a visual artist, trained as a visual artist, a multimedia artist, and a you know, former DJ and a curator, and creating concerts and videos and other stuff. Even DJing to me is storytelling. It's really storytelling. And as Lester Young says, you know, playing his own music, a solo is a story.
Right.
So it's about you come in there, you set up, like you said, Steve Robinson, a theme. What's your theme for the night? What's the angle? What are you trying to share? Where are you going with what you do? And I approach that with pretty much everything I do. I don't want to waste anyone's time. Time is precious. So I want to.
It takes a lot of work. It's hard.
Yes.
You just can't pull records off the shelf and throw them on the air. You have to think about it.
Now, how would you guys, I'm going to ask all you guys in the time we have left. How do we fix this problem? Because right now the musicians that I know seem totally divorced from the radio, totally. And now that we found out that Bandcamp, which everybody was in love with, that distributed music for jazz musicians, has now been bought by a video company, game company. Everybody's expecting Bandcamp to go the whole market research, the least amount for the greatest number sort of thing. So, I mean, we got to end on some kind of positive trajectory somehow. Can we at all?
Yeah. Are there any frequencies left in Philadelphia? I mean being on WRTI from 7 p.m. to it's a disgrace. It's not It's not jazz. I mean, nobody listens to the radio at night. I'm sorry. Whatever I say nobody. I mean, as we know, it goes down starting at 7 p.m. And so the jazz, I guess it was 25 years ago, got screwed. Maybe there's another frequency to buy, or maybe you can, raise the money to purchase a frequency. I mean, because sitting around here talking about how to fix it, there's no way to fix it because it's dead. It's already dead. You can't fix a dead body. I guess it died 25 years ago when it went at 7 p.m. I'm sure people listen. They know they can get jazz in the evening. Okay, there's nothing wrong with that, but not when people listen to the radio.
Well, can you give any suggestions to the people that are running the station now, WRTI, to maybe bring back some of the old ways of doing things like Homer was talking about, thematic work, building a context, getting that call and response from the DJs and their audiences? I mean, are there ways to maybe reach back and bring some of that into the mix?
Well, I think that what it really comes down to is a kind of a collective consciousness, a collective mindset of understanding what we're dealing with. And if we have enough people who believe that the history of the music is wide and deep, and it includes everything, and we take an all-inclusive approach to the history of jazz and Black music in America, then we insist that that's what's reflected on our radio stations or on our podcasts or wherever the future is going with this. And I think people need to, I don't know, it's just puzzling to me that always the people who talk about the most listener donations always went out. Because I don't, as I said before, I don't think that listener donations are the be all and end all and the measure of what's making a good radio station. I think it's almost the opposite. It's like, in order to increase, that's why smooth jazz is what it is, because it's for the lowest common denominator. It's simple music and it's easy listening music, and it has a very narrow range, and it's good for playing in a shopping mall in China. That's where it belongs.
God.
And I think that, WRTI is about to enter into a new phase because Bob Perkins is retiring. And when we were on the air, Bob Perkins wasn't part of WRTI when we were there. there were 8 people who were connected where Bob Perkins, in the community where he sits. So there were other people who offered various pictures of that same universe. And so him moving out of WRTI leaves a challenge and an opportunity for them to come up with new ways to engage their audience, to possibly bring in new people. They've been doing a number of things. I know they do those Facebook concerts. They do the NPR live concerts. They're one of the leading stations in the country doing some of those kinds of things. So they have some possibilities, but just like everybody else, they have challenges in terms of how to get an audience. Ultimately, I think this jazz music, not just the jazz scene, but the whole music scene needs to see itself as an ecosystem, and we need to collaborate with each other. We need to be engaged and invested in each other to collectively survive. And if COVID has taught us anything, it should have taught us that.
Yeah. So maybe there should be more community input to our local jazz station.
Definitely. People need to rise up and complain.
Steve. Oh gosh. Well, do we have, I'm going to check and see if we have any other questions.
Well, there's a whole conversation going on, Sue.
Oh, okay. Well, I've been listening. Steve, tell us what's going on since you're looking at it.
Oh, gosh. Someone is wondering, for example, why someone says, what about the jazz faculty at Temple?
Temple has a great jazz faculty.
Yeah, and my answer to it is no, this is a rule of thumb. No music stations housed at universities ever interact with the faculty of music at that university, ever. It's like, it's a
That's
mystery.
kind of interesting.
And now why is that?
Because I don't know, because, it's any, like, well, WBUR in the old days, when it was all classical. I mean, I went to BU School of Music. I went over to the radio station, but that was the exception. I don't know what it is. I mean,
And Terrell Stafford
does Temple have a classical music faculty?
Yeah.
Are they
Yeah,
on
they
WRTI? Do you ever hear them on the station? No, probably, right? Are they?
I don't think so.
Performing and talking? No.
Terrell.
But Steve, that might have something to do with that fundraising piece. The orchestra, the Philadelphia Orchestra, has more resources. The university is actually looking for donations to a certain extent, so it makes it hard to. That's an interesting conundrum.
Yeah, they don't want the Philadelphia Jazz Orchestra and Terrell Stafford to take anything away from the Philadelphia Orchestra because he gets more money. That's enlightening. That truly is.
Anyway.
Somebody says here, Jerry Gordon, who I remember from the old days, Third Street Jazz. Thank you, Russell. Does a jazz show on WPRB in Princeton. Yeah, I'm familiar with that station.
Awesome.
So Jerry's terrific. Okay. Well, I want to thank everybody for their conversation tonight, and
we should acknowledge Bobby Booker, who's a WRTI alum as well as a current staff member. She's
was
here.
Bobby here? Hi, Bobby.
Yeah, I just saw her name there.
And
Hi,
Kendra's
Bobby.
here. Kendra Butler, I think I saw her come in.
And also,
Hey, Kendra.
I see Michelle Rice Maximan, which I didn't know her, but I looked her up. What an amazing woman.
Oh, she's a dear friend of mine. Yeah.
Yeah, she's amazing.
Hi, Michelle. We'll go to Paris one day together, I promise. All right, well,
At some point, it would be nice. One dream that I have is doing an oral history of WRTI and getting interviews with as many of the people that were on the air here as we can. And, there's so many awesome people that we haven't mentioned this evening who really were part of the whole fabric, because it was definitely a collective effort. And, and that's what made it special.
Steve, let's talk about that.
I see someone says that Temple has a new president. That was the last thing.
Yes.
Go lobby him. Go tell him to combine. What about combining the classical and the jazz into one big format? what an awesome thing that would be.
Mhm.
Steve, I'm going to give him your number.
Okay.
Give him both of our numbers, then he's really.
Yeah, that's what I was saying. All right, let me put up, I want to introduce Lex Samakis. He's out of Temple. Lex, put your face on there, Lex, for a minute. So
Hey,
people can
Lex.
see you. Where are you, Lex? I don't see you.
Just a second, just a second. I gotta,
Oh, and Jack McCarthy's here too. He's my partner in crime at the Jazz Archives we're working on. So, all right. Well, while we're waiting for Lex.
hello.
Oh, there he is. Let's hear it for Lex. Thank you so much, Lex, for being our tech.
It's funny you highlight me today. This is probably my easiest day, like doing this. So today of all days, but I appreciate it.
Okay, well, put up the one where we've got all the URLs of these terrific guys. And I will put this, I will send this to everybody who attended, so you can go check out Steve Rowland and Steve Robinson at the New Media Project, and of course, Homer Jackson at the Philadelphia Jazz Project. And the last thing, put up, I'll put this in the on the Eventbrite thing. Just to remind everybody, your tax deductible donations will help the community build our Philadelphia Jazz Archives together for everyone to enjoy. So if you get a minute, go to phillyjazzhistory.org and sign up for our newsletter. And I'm also asking, I'm going to be starting to put videos, old and new, because I got some older videos from like the early 1980s I've been putting up for the Willingboro Jazz Festival. So you have an old video, they really came out nice. Let me see it and I'll put it up on our YouTube site, and it'll be nice to have some of that stuff all together in one place, which we've been doing. So I'd like to thank once again Steve Rowland. Thank you, Steve. Steve
Thank you.
Robinson. Thank you, Steve Robinson. I'm so glad Steve introduced me to you. And Homer Jackson, thank you so much. And I'll see everybody at our next thing. I'm developing the next talks about, and it's going to be about jazz writing in Philadelphia. So stay tuned. Take care.
Bye.
Everybody, thank you.
Bye-bye.